Why is it live?
Hmm?
We're live. It didn't play the intro. Thank you, Windows Updates.
Well, welcome to this episode of the YAHOWAH blog. Here we are in the Rainbow Studio. We've got the Wook with us. It didn't play the normal introduction, so we were caught a bit off guard. We are returning, and this has probably been now a couple of weeks since we've been last down here in the Rainbow Studio. But we are returning to the narrative that is presented by Gabriel to Daniel in Babylon, Babel. It's an interesting series of prophecies because, well, first of all, Daniel wasn't actually a prophet. As we went through the first 25 statements of DanielNine, what we learned is that he got even his current history incorrect. He had this whole narrative about Darius and the history of the kings of Babylon and Persia, and every statement he made was incorrect. So clearly he's not a prophet. He's not a historian either, but he could write. And Gabriel is thought to be an angel. In Christianity, they have Gabriel fly in to tell the mythical Mary that she's a virgin, but she's pregnant.
Never happened.
Yeah. So, and in Islam, well, they take it way, way, way crazy, where Muhammad says that it was Gabriel that gave him the Quran. Yeah, the rat's ass that has any chance of being true. The fact is that Gabriel, as it is declared twice here in Daniel, is a man. And Gabriel says that he is a man. It is from Gaber, and the Hebrew word means to be a strong man. It speaks of a mortal man, and to be Gabor is to be a particularly confident, capable, courageous man, and El means of God. So this individual, the individual that is the most frequently identified with Gabor in the prophets, is David, the chosen one, our Messiah, the returning king, the very Son of God is GaborEl. So the prophet in this case is Dowd as the GaborEl, and the scribe is Daniel, who was not actually a prophet. Now, what makes this narrative even more interesting is the fact that Christianity usurps this series of prophecies to claim that it speaks of a arriving Messiah that's going to save the world. But first of all, it doesn't say that. And second of all, they changed the title from Messiah to Christ, and there's no validity in doing so. And then they make Christ a last name as opposed to a title, which is even worse. And then on top of all of that, they don't recognize that the one who made the prophecy was speaking of himself. Dowd is the Messiah, and he was the one who would come to be cut off, but not for himself. So it's quite a prophecy that no one seems to be able to get right. And I think that even what follows now will surprise you as we continue with it. It reads, "Therefore know," which is Yada. "It is beneficial for you to be aware by coming to possess the information required to recognize and to gain the insights to understand, which is Sakal, realizing that the best option is for you to be prudent after learning, succeeding by prospering, by being attentive, being educated, being intelligent and wise, so that you can perceive that from the going forth of the word, the Matsah Dabar, this stage being set to begin the process in accord with this message to return to restore, shub, to bring back to its original state, building, bana, establishing Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the source of teaching and guidance on reconciliation until the restoring testimony and the eternal witness, the ad, up to as far as and for an extension of time to become victorious and to receive the spoils evidenced by the witness of the Son of the Sovereign, who is conspicuously making this known and who is providing the leadership and the counsel, neged, of the one who has officially obtained the status of being properly appointed, and the one who has expounded upon and then announced and proclaimed the message of HaMashyach, the Mashyach. I actually shouldn't have said ha. That is, the definite article is not included here. So technically it's not stated as a title, but nevertheless, it's difficult to say in English without including the definite article that isn't actually in the text. So it is of Mashyach, anointed Messiah, the one who is set apart, anointed, and prepared to serve as authorized are seven sevens and the seven promises and fulfilled vows. This is Shabuaim and followed by Shiba'ah, contracted oaths fulfilled in harmony with the promises of Shabuah over 7 periods of 7. Therefore, in 62 weeks, Shabim, Wa Shanaim, based upon the promise of 7, in 60 and in 62 weeks, she shall be restored. Shub, she will return and recover and be rebuilt to reestablish and fortify. This is from Bana. She will develop the way to grow and expand. Rakoba, opening the way by increasing the area where people can congregate. It is from Rachab, to grow larger and expand by being diligent and decisive. Charutz, by becoming sharper, more determined, increasingly judgmental, separated and defensive in a troubled time of oppression. Ba, shok ha etz, during a period of anguishing subjugation, restrictions, constraints, and persecution, being harassed and pushed into a corner. It's from shuk, to constrain and oppress. This is Daniel 9:25. Now I'm going to read further and then we're going to go back because there's some surprising aspects of this. Then after the 62 weeks, the anointed Messiah, and it's just written as Mashyach, will be cut off and separated, but not for himself. Daniel 9:26. Now it's in part, because at this point, there appears to be a gargantuan shift in the narrative. And so I think we better begin here and see if we can understand it to this point before we deal with this shift. Because unless you understand who the players are, you're going to get yourself in some serious trouble, as many people have. And what they end up doing is just taking a part of something out of context and pretending that it applies to a religious myth. So Gabriel, who is God's most capable and confident, courageous and combative man, preferenced his prophecy with Yada, and follow that by Shakal. That is to say, by prudently processing this information, we gain the insights needed to understand. This means that Dowd is a thinking man's prophet. When he repeatedly indicates that to figure this out, and Dowd has done this now several times in his narration through Daniel to us, that we need to be discerning, that we need to learn by processing the information which he is providing in an intelligent manner, experience should now dictate that what follows, we need to use our heads to discern how it applies to us, what he is actually saying, what the implications are. This is something we need to come to know and then process intelligently if we're going to understand this and perceive how the pieces of this puzzle that he has provided fit together, as opposed to plucking out Mashyach references out of context to promote an agenda contrary to everything he actually revealed, as Christians have done throughout the centuries. Now, Dowd is predicting that there will be a public decree issued regarding the liberation of Yahudim, Jews, from Babel. Babel is the commingling, which confuses in Babylon. It's also the basis of Bible, so I would be very concerned if I were you if you use that term. Therefore, it's worth considering the similarity between this and the decree to leave Mitzrayim, the crucibles of religious and political oppression during Pesach at the outset of the Matsah Exodus. Yahweh introduced PesachMatsahBikuwrym to physically liberate the children of Israel from religious and political oppression, which is what Mitzrayim means. And then Shabuah followed, where he shared his Torah teaching with Moshe and then Moshe to us. The process would continue with Yahweh explaining the Mikre, these 7 annual meetings, PesachMatsahBikuwrym, Shabuah, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah, to Moshe, which he would ultimately convey to us, and they lead us back into a relationship with God and to the promised land. The proclamation that Dowd is currently addressing is quite similar. This time, Yehudim will be liberated from religious and political subjugation in Babel, the birthplace of the beast, which would evolve from imperial Rome to Roman Catholicism and then reemerge as Islam. Not only would they be physically freed, Yehudim would be able to rebuild Jerusalem, the source of guidance on reconciliation, which is the city of Dowd, who is the very person who is revealing this prophecy to us. After the passage of the specified time, Dowd's nephesh, soul, would return to his city within a bashar, a body that was reconstituted from his DNA to serve his people by fulfilling Pesach. And then without that body, his nephesh soul would carry our guilt into Sheol on Matsah, which would lead to the benefits of Bikuwrym, firstborn children. This would enable the enrichment and the empowerment of the covenant family as we are withdrawn on Shabuah, which will occur within the next 2 years. And in so doing, the nephesh souls of God's family are going to come home, surviving the tyranny that is surrounding us in all corners of the world. The world is about to enter a death spiral and will all but destroy itself. When we identify the timing of this decree, then we do the math from Abib 1, 444 BCE, that's the starting date. We must add 7 weeks of years. 7 times 7 is equals 49 prophetic years until Jerusalem would be rebuilt. Then there would be another 62 weeks, 62 times 7, 434 prophetic years, for a total of 483 years until he would enter Jerusalem to fulfill Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym. It's quite a prophecy. He's given you a very specific date. Now, to calculate Dowd's arrival from Dowd's prophecy, we must multiply 483, which is again 49 plus 434 years, or multiply by the 360 days in the Torah's prophetic calendar. This equates to 1,000 173,880 days. That's just 476 solar years plus an additional 20 days. That's when divided by a 365.25 solar years, so that you have some reference. It's a little tough to deal with 173,880 days, but you get a much clearer understanding of that when the prophetic year is divided by solar years, and it represents 476 years plus an additional 20 days. So this is what we need to add to our starting point, which would have been Nisan 1 in 444 BCE. And that was derived because it was 20 years after Artaxerxes I secured the throne. It was the 20th year of Artaxerxes that this decree was scheduled to be made. Now, this prophecy, so that you have a frame of reference, is being given by Dowd, who is Gabriel, to Daniel, in 555 BCE. So this decree would be issued 111 years thereafter in 444 BCE. Although none of this, I'm going to tell you the truth, is particularly easy because, well, years are not necessarily years. And I say that because the solar lunar calendar that was used at the time by the Hebrews and also by the Babylonians, well, it featured a 354-day year with the addition of 29.5 days for an additional lunar month, 7 out of every 19 years. You see, if you go 12 lunar months, the year is shy of the 365 and a quarter days of an actual orbit around the sun. So the only way they could keep track of time was to use the method that mankind used for millennia, which was the phases of the moon. A new month started with a new moon and ended at the same point. So it was 29.5 days to go through the full lunar cycle. But 12 lunar cycles is shy of a solar year, so that what the Hebrews did at the time is the same thing the Babylonians did at the time, which is that 7 out of every 19 years, you would add an intercalendar year. Yahweh's instructions on how to do this, quite interestingly, he wanted the new year to begin with Abib. Abib is a word that indicates that the barley crop would be green and growing at the time, so that it would be ready to harvest. Barley is an interesting grain in that the winter barley is the first grain crop to be harvestable each year. And it is unique in that it can be harvested, in fact, needs to be harvested when it's green and growing, and then allowed to dry in the field after having been cut. Where if you did that with wheat, for example, which is be the next harvest that typically is in May or June, and you cut wheat before it is dry in the stalk, it will rot. So barley is unique in that it needs to be Abib, still green and growing. And so God's instructions to the Hebrew were that you choose the first light on the moon's surface, reflecting the sun's light, of course, on the moon's surface, that is closest to the time when barley is Abib, green and growing, and therefore ready to be harvested. What that entails, if you were to cut to the chase in terms of being able to ascertain when Abib first is today, since we don't have the same climatic conditions in and around Jerusalem. They weren't in Jerusalem at the time; they were in Babylon, and since there aren't a lot of barley crops being grown in a place that is highly congested at this time, it is essentially the time of the renewed light on the moon's surface that's nearest the vernal equinox. There will always be a first light on the moon's surface that is predictable or observable within 2 weeks of the vernal equinox. Right. This now it's between the 20th and the 22nd, typically, of May. Equinox means the time that the daylight hours and the nighttime hours are equivalent, because our Earth is not only orbiting around the sun, but is on an axis. And when you put that together, that's the time. So it's within 2 weeks of that time. But I'm sharing all this with you just to let you know that it isn't simple to say, well, you go X number of years from 444 BCE, because you've got some challenges. And one of those challenges is you have to say, well, what is a year? Is it 12 months of moon phases of 29.5 days? Is it the prophetic 360-day calendar that was used in Bereshith, Genesis, during the flood? Is it the 365.25 day calendar that we use today with leap years in it? How do you account for the fact that, and the transition from BCE to CE, or if you prefer the religious terminology, BC to AD, guess what the Roman Catholics forgot? Year zero.
Year zero?
No, year zero. So it goes from 1 BCE to 1 AD without year zero being in between. So you need to
still got to make up for that year.
You still got to make up for that year, because guess what? It really happened. So these are all the challenges that we must overcome. There clearly was no Julian calendar in 555 BCE, nor in 444 BCE, and there obviously was no Roman Catholic calendar either, which is the one that we're using today. So this whole concept of what is a year and how to process leap days and properly adjust the solar lunar calendar wouldn't be conceived until halfway through this period, and even then it wasn't properly accepted around the world, and certainly not applied by the Babylonians or the Jews. That is all to say, Dowd's intent with this prophecy was to get the thoughtful listener or reader to realize that when one adds 476 years from Nisan in 444 BCE, they would arrive in Abib in the Yobel year of 4,000 Yah. That is to say, in the late April or early May period in 33 CE. Now, this means that realizing that there was no year zero in the Julian or Gregorian calendars, once you understand all of that, the rest of the math is fairly easy to lay out. Although I will tell you, it does take some time, and you don't want to be distracted in the process. But nonetheless, I have done the diligence here for you. In 33 CE, the vernal equinox was on March 22nd. The nearest emerging lunar crescent was on March 19th, and therefore 476 years and 20 days from the first day of the new year in 444 BCE brings us to the conclusion of Chag Matsah in 33 CE, which is telling us that not only did Dowd know that he would arrive in his second of 3 lives as the Messiah, to be crucified and then separated on Matsah, that it would occur in year 4,000 Yah, and that his focus was on the completion of Chag Matsah. And this is exceedingly important, because in Christianity, which claims this prophecy for their religion, there is no mention of Matsah. In fact, their Jesus, not Dowd, was asleep in the tomb on Matsah, didn't do anything. The toughest of all of the fulfillments is Matsah, because it's when Dowd's soul, Nefesh, went into Sheol, hell, to deposit our guilt there, never to be seen again. And it is a 7-day celebration, and the dates work out such that it occurred at the conclusion of Matsah. So it would have been hard to miss in year 4000 Yah. Also because there was a total solar eclipse on the first day of Abib. The Christian New Testament wants you believe there was a solar eclipse on Passover. Passover is always the 14th day of the new month, which means it's a full moon. Guess what there cannot be with a solar eclipse? It has to be a new moon, because it means that the moon is between us and the sun. That's the only way you can get a solar eclipse. And so Christians were really, really stupid. You could have a solar eclipse on the 1st of Abib, but not on the 14th of Abib. On the 14th of Abib, you could have a lunar eclipse. And guess what? There was one in 33 CE. So you got both. Christians didn't know the time. They had no idea what was happening. They had their guide. I guess it's because their God was napping at the time. That's why they wouldn't know. So yeah, it's not their fault. Their God fell asleep. Now their God wasn't very big. Their God was only as big as a man. That's not much of a God. And their God was pretty inept because, the Christian God was able to be killed by men. And then, he missed Matsah entirely. So he didn't fulfill this prophecy because he was sleeping at the time. And rather than going into Sheol to take our guilt there, he decided to do one better than the Passover lamb. Rather than the Passover lamb accepting our guilt so that we might live, no, he decided that he'd come back to life. Now, of course, God says in the Torah that the Passover lamb, the remains of it must be incinerated that night, which means you could not have been the Passover lamb if your body was resurrected.
Oops.
That's the technical term for it, is oops. So this prophecy has Dowd speaking in the 6th century BCE, foretelling his service to fulfill Chag Matsah, and the very week he did so in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. Now, that's quite impressive. Now, since Dowd had witnessed his future and had written about it in his Mizmor 1,000 years in advance of fulfilling Chag Matsah, and since he returns from his future fulfillment of Yom Kippurim and 2033 to provide this prophetic report back in time in circa 555 BCE, he was fully aware of what would occur and what would transpire. Dowd is a prophet of the first order. What has been lost on so many is how exquisitely the detail of the prophecy matched its fulfillment. Dowd's entry into Jerusalem coincided with the day that the Paschal lamb would have been brought into the household, which is on the 10th of Abib. And then, just as they had in Hezekiah's time, when large crowds gathered in Jerusalem, the source of guidance and reconciliation, he lived and walked among the people. They got to know him. And as the sun set on the 14th day of Abib, he observed the Passover feast, expecting us to remember and respect the role he was fulfilling by that promise. It was Dowd who did these things as the Son of God and Messiah, not the fake Jesus. And the moment you associate Passover with Jesus, then you've screwed the pup. Because guess what? He could not have fulfilled Passover without his body being incinerated that night. And the moment he is fulfilling Passover, then the Torah still applies, and there can be no new religion of Christianity. And the whole dead God on a stick thing just falls right apart. So there you have it. And of course, you need to recognize that Dowd gave a prophecy where his date is the end of the celebration of the 7 days of Chag Matsah, making Chag Matsah more important because, well, Passover is part of Chag Matsah. Chag Matsah is not part of Passover. The essential celebration is Matsah, of which Passover is simply the first day. Oops is the technical term for that too.
Once again.
No one said that Paul was particularly bright. Dowd's sacrifice corresponded perfectly with the designated time of Chag Matsah, including Passover, Matsah, and Bikuwrym. And it was just before the sunset on the 14th day of Abib that his nephesh soul surrendered his mortal Bashar body. And the Ruach carried his nephesh soul into Sheol, laden with our guilt, so it could be deposited in what it essentially is a black hole, never to be seen again. The prophecy of the Mikre, these invitations to be called out and meet of Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, were fulfilled right down to the last detail. There should have been no mistaking what he had done, at least for those who were Darash, consistently seeking to know Yahweh, who read the Torah to find the way to him, and who pondered the implications of the relationship he intended by diligently studying the prophets. Now, nearly 40 Yobel thereafter, we're using Teruah and Shabuah to call a remnant of Yisrael and Yehudim back home to the promised land, to their Messiah, and to Yahweh. This reunion will occur. The homecoming will occur on Kippurim, reconciliations, which leads to Sukkah, camping out with our Father and his family forevermore as God restores the earth to the conditions experienced during Eden, during the garden, doing so on Teruah 15 days before we return to the garden and 10 days before Father and Son, Yahweh and Dowd, return. Now, in this way, with the proclamation to leave Babylon, and restore Yehudim and Jerusalem, the source of guidance on reconciliation, one event foreshadows the next, becoming a harbinger of what follows, each step liberating us from the religious influence of political control so that we can come home and live as a family. So in conjunction with the redemption of his people, we have two options with the Neged. You can read Neged as the son of the sovereign, and you can make the sovereign Yahweh. But that's really a fairly odd fit because he's already announced that he is the Mashyach, and Yahweh 3 times says that Dowd is his son, that he is his father. And Yahweh is in all of the future prophecies proclaiming that Dowd is king forevermore. So the sovereign, from Yahweh's perspective, particularly at this time, is Dowd. So the Neged would be considered a prince, not the king. He would be considered a son of the sovereign, someone who is next in line in terms of authority to the king. And so it really is awkward to render the Neged as Dowd. It is far more likely that this Neged is someone that is reporting to Dowd, that works underneath Dowd at this time.
Somebody that reflects his light.
Yeah, it would be like the lesser luminary, the Katan Maor, to the Gabor Maor, the greater luminary, in Bereshith Genesis 1. It'd be like the tree, the Etz of Dayath, explaining the way to return to the Etz Shamim, tree of lives, in the next chapter of Genesis 2. I think highly likely in that case. And in this situation, we were told that the Neged's responsibility was to address what the Mashyach would achieve. And until these series of books called YadaYahowah and this blog, the Yahweh blog, announced that Dowd is the Messiah He is the Son of God. He is the returning king and the prophet who not only revealed this to Dowd, being the first to ever do that as Gabriel, but also he is the one who in his second of 3 lives fulfilled this very prophecy that he is making right here. And he was speaking of his own fulfillment of Chag Matsah. So there's only one person in human history that has made those deductions, and he's the one sharing all of this with you now. Now, recognizing that Dowd's gruesome and heroic portrayal of his soul's fulfillment of PesachMatsahBikuwrym was presented in the 22nd Mizmor, where he wrote it in first person. He told us 1,000 years in advance of enduring it that he would be crucified, his body would be crucified, and that his soul would go into the black hole of Sheol on Matsah, and that he would then celebrate Bikuwrym with YAHOWAH. Wrote all about it in the 22nd Mizmor, all in first person. And what's so amazing about that, this was 1,000 years before he would endure it. It was, some 600 years before crucifixion was even invented, some 500 years before Rome existed. Pretty damn impressive, I'll tell you that for sure. And then he comes in 555 BCE to announce the exact date and to tell you what would occur as a result and what would occur 2,000 years later as all hell breaks loose in and around Israel and Jerusalem, and the final players come together. It was among the most powerful prophecies, completely misunderstood and ignored by everyone, Jews, Muslims, Christians, you name it. So the Mizmor predicts what would happen to him 1,000 years before he endured it, 450 years before he made this proclamation in Babel to Daniel, which means Dowd gets around. You know, he lived right around 1000 BCE, where he was king of Jerusalem. Got an early start at 8 years old. He was anointed Mashyach by YAHOWAH, called the first person ever, only person actually, to be called multiple times. He is my son. I am his father, of Dowd. He is the one that YAHOWAH said he is returning as king. And when he does, his throne's going to be as brilliant as the sun in his presence. So he had a pretty remarkable life for 70 years, around 1000 BCE. And he first life ended 4 years before year 3000 Yah, which was 968 BCE. He likely appeared as an adult 4 years prior to the fulfillment, 3.5 years to 4 years prior to the fulfillment of Chag Matsah in 33 CE. And that was 1,000 years later in year 4000 Yah. And his return as king will be in year 6000 Yah, which is 2033. So there's a lot we can deduce from this, but clearly he got around. He's already had 2 lives. He's talking about in here the second of 2 lives. And YAHOWAH is emphatic that he will return as king, which would be his 3rd life. Now, that shouldn't be all that difficult for people to understand. Souls are different than bodies. Bodies have 1 life. Some don't even last very long. And souls, though, can continue to exist forever if they're enveloped in YAHOWAH's spiritual energy and light. And on a photon of light, when you are enveloped in light, time is a dimension that you can maneuver. So God can take a soul enveloped in light back and forward in time. And so he took Dowd from around 1000 BCE forward in time to this event in 555 BCE to issue this prophecy, and then brought Dowd back in 33 CE, probably in 29 is when he would have actually, 29 or 30, he would have been reconstituted within a physical body, his soul. That would have been the next time that Dowd's Nephesh soul was used. And he is bringing him back in 2033, which is less than 8 years from now, which will be his third arrival. The other thing to keep in mind is that nobody seems to have a problem with Elijah having been taken by God and returning. So you don't really think he's coming back in a 3,000-year-old body, do you? Probably
The
not.
religious do.
Oh, well, okay, well. So God is able to give him 2 lives, right? Actually, he gets 3 lives because he sacrifices his life on Yom Kippurim, the physical body, not his soul, to fulfill the need for the blood of a goat to reconcile Yisrael on Kippurim in accordance with the Torah. But Dowd gets 3 lives. The fellow here that is the Neged, he also gets 3 lives. Now, don't be particularly envious of that. 2 lives is great. Every covenant member, everyone who benefits from what Dowd has offered here by fulfilling Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, those who make it on the Shabu and Teruah ingatherings, they all get 2 lives. Second life is in Shamaim. Actually, we get a time to make the garden experience right for man for 1,000 years before we go to Shamaim. And the people who have been religious and political and led people astray, they get to have a second life too. It's just that it's in the place of eternal separation called Sheol, not something you probably would want to experience. So multiple lives is not an uncommon situation for YAHOWAH. In fact, why even go through all of this unless the benefit, result of fulfilling the Moedim of Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym was to give souls an extension of life. Isn't that the whole purpose? So you shouldn't be surprised, and you shouldn't be jealous of the 3 fellows that got 3 lives as opposed to 2, because one of those 3 lives serves as a sacrifice where, I'm quite certain that Dowd did not have any fun fulfilling Pesach and Matsah. And mine is, as this Neged, mine is to be the bull that is bludgeoned on Teruah to purge the mortal remnant of Yisrael of their guilt so that they can be prepared for Dowd's return and entry into the garden on Sukkah. That really isn't going to be any fun. It is described as a bloody mess. But nonetheless, that's the nature of all of this, and it is Dowd and his second of 3 lives that fulfilled Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym in year 4000 33 CE. And of course, the natural conclusion from that is this notion that nobody knows the time and the hour. That is absolutely brain dead. The spring Mikre, Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym were fulfilled by Dowd by his own prophecy in 33 CE. It is year 4000 Yah. That makes year 6000 Yah when the last 3 Moedim will be fulfilled, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah in 2033. And those dates are the 24th of September, the 2nd of October, and the 7th of October is when each of those begin. Actually, Teruah begins on the 23rd, but the big celebration and the sacrifice is on the 24th. And while Kippurim would be on the 2nd and 3rd of October, the homecoming is actually at sunset, 6:22 p.m. on October 2nd. So we use that date. And there will be a grand reopening of Eden on the 7th of October. But Sukkah, the celebration is not only 7 + 1 days, 8 days, but it's going to be played out over a full 1,000-year period. So those are your dates. Should you want to mark your calendar and be there. So clearly, Dowd knew what was going to happen to himself and to Yisrael. And as Gabriel, he is God's most courageous and capable man. He was his own Bashar, herald, and providing the best and worst news, all of which Yehudim and Goyim have ignored and twisted. Then it says, then the people and the nation, this is the Am, of the Neged. So you have to say, all right, who do you want this Neged to be? Who is to come? Who will bow? will be corrupted, will be ravaged, will be destroyed. He will be castrated and cut off. He is going to be annihilated in the city and before the set apart sanctuary. And his demise, when he is Coots, when we find that he is cast off at the conclusion of this time, will be overwhelming. It's going to be outrageous. It's going to be especially intense with an overpowering force, so that up to the very last moment in the end, we're going to see that war will have been decreed, quickly decided upon and pronounced, which will be devastating, desolating, and appalling, even horrifying. This is Daniel 9:26. Now, this is not the way that it reads in Bible. But remember, Bible is from Babel, which means to confound and confuse, so you shouldn't be surprised. Again, here you have two options regarding this neged. Now, if you took the first option, and this is all the same verse. We started 9:26, and I said, that's it in part. We're going to deal with the rest later because there's a really, really abrupt transition here. Neged is used in both of them. So if you want to have the neged be the son of the sovereign, as in Dowd, the son of God, or even stupid, you want to apply it to mythical Jesus. Same word used right here. One sentence to the next. How are you going to rationally claim that they are different people?
You can't.
You can't. You just can't. They cannot be different people. The neged is still the neged. It is being spoken of by Dowd. He is saying the son of the sovereign, the number two guy in the government is what he's saying. So the number two guy in the government, who is the guy that's making all of this known to Israel at this time regarding the sacrifice of the Messiah, and precisely when and why he fulfilled Chag Matzah, is the same guy that is being brutalized here. Now, Christians would tell you, well, the first neged is Jesus, but he never existed, and that the second neged is the Antichrist.
That's not in context.
But that's just mind-bogglingly stupid. You can't have the same word be prophesied by a person inspired by God that is precisely accurate with when he himself is going to fulfill Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym. And listen, and if you've listened to these series, when I was going through the reanalysis of Daniel for the most recent book that I have written on this material, which is Time of Trouble. It's YAHOWAH Volume 9. You know that I've gone to great lengths to explain exactly how all of these days fit, and how 33 CE, year 4000 Yah, is the only year within a century either way that fits the scenario that Dowd delivered. And you also know at this point that the neged, number two person in the government, under the Messiah, is the very one who has heralded his message, and the only one who has done that, just as I have brought this to your attention previously. But I want you to also keep in mind that if you want to pretend this is the Antichrist, that is a person who is possessed by Satan, guess what? He can't die. Satan can't die. Those who advocate on behalf of Satan can't die. Spirits are immortal. That's why Sheol exists as a place of incarceration, which light itself cannot escape, because spirits are equivalent to light energy, and those who advocate on behalf of demonic spirits like Hasatan, Satan, the adversary, they become immortal and forever separated from God in the black hole of Sheol. So it can't apply. to somebody who is allied with Satan, because he can't die. But what can happen is the same thing that happened to Dowd. The physical body of the Neged can and will be sacrificed. That physical body is going to reach a completion of time. It's going to be chopped down and torn apart, mauled, every bone but one broken, according to the prophecies.
It's gruesome.
It's gruesome. And that is the sacrifice known as the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. That is corrupted to red heifer. It's not what it means. It means bloody red man of the earth who is particularly productive and fruitful in what he is accomplishing. And it is Elia that is going to be the master of the ceremonies, as after this gruesome sacrifice, just like Passover was an exceedingly gruesome sacrifice with Dowd, his Neged undergoes a gruesome sacrifice perpetrated by the same beast, the beast of Rome. And now we have the Fourth Reich reestablished. It is Donald Trump who is this character who is imbued with the spirit of Satan. He and his minions are going to brutalize my body. I am the Adamah Parah. Whether you believe that or not is immaterial to me. Don't really care. But that is the series of events. This is the Neged that is being discussed. And this is what's going to happen to him. And it will be overwhelming. It will be outrageous. It will be intense. The force will be overbearing. And this will be the very last moment for the war. The time of Israel's troubles begins 22 May of 2026, less than 6 months from now. It concludes on this day. This is Teruah in 2033, the beginning of the celebration of Chag Matsah in year 6000 Yah. The last battle of the war against God's people ends with the sacrifice of this Neged on that date. So the Neged who is heralding what Dowd did in 33 CE, opening the doorway to life, perfecting us by carrying our guilt away, and then enabling us to be enriched and empowered as God's children on Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, recognizes that on Teruah, which is the first of the three celebrations of the fall Mikre in year 6000 Yah, that his the Neged who perfect his people, so that this final remnant of Yisrael can celebrate his return with Yahweh as king and enter the garden of great joy of Eden on Sukkah. And that is when the war will end, because all of this has been decided upon, pronounced, and decreed. And up to this point, it's going to be devastating. It's going to be appalling. It's going to be horrifying. But so was the fulfillment of Pesach. And yet it still didn't get the attention of Jews. This will be not only every bit as horrifying, what happens to the Adamah Parah, but now with smartphones everywhere and video instantly in capturing everything that happens in the world, and satellites so that they'll come right to your phone no matter where you are. Everyone the world over is going to see what happens here.
It's going to be live streamed.
Live stream. The date is sunrise, the 24th of September, 2033. And it's the fulfillment of Yom Teruah. And it will have Elia has returned to be the master of ceremonies. When the body is put on the altar after having been ravaged, it'll be Yahweh who releases copious amounts of water from underneath the Temple Mount, and he will ignite the fires, and that collectively the searing flames of the fire and the bubbling up of this water mixed with the ash of the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah is going to purge the remnant of Israel, and just as it is described in Numbers 19 and Numbers 5, and presented in Yeshaya in the 17th chapter. This is what's going to occur, and that is what Dowd has predicted. And it's important for you to appreciate if you're going to capitalize on everything that you have heard up to this point. This is the portrayal of the last days, and it is extraordinarily important for you to have an appreciation of. And I think that's probably a good spot for us to conclude this program. We'll pick it up from here in our next review, but you've been given quite an insight as to who the Messiah really is. When he fulfilled Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, who would reveal what he has accomplished, and then who will purge the remnant of Israel in 2033 of their guilt, so that Dowd returns as king. Thank you for listening.